We are one day away from the jersey retirement for Sergei Zubov at the American Airlines Center, his number 56 being put up in the rafters for all eternity. On today's show, we will talk about the legacy and career of Sergei Zubov, starting with his time in New York with the Rangers and ending his career here in Dallas with the Stars. All of this coming up on a Thursday edition of Locked on Stars.
You're Locked on Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked on Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey. And it is Thursday, January 27th. Like I said, one day away from the Dallas Stars returning home from their 4-game road trip and one day away from Sergei Zubov's jersey retirement. His number 56 being put up with the other retired numbers with the likes of Modano and other numbers up there as well. But Modano being clearly the biggest name in franchise history, the best American-born player. But we're not here to talk about Mike Modano in too much depth today, even though if you are watching on YouTube, you might see the new jersey behind me that I got in the mail the other day. Had to get myself a throwback Dallas Stars jersey. Really, really like that look. Not necessarily a little bit before my time, a little bit before my generation, those jerseys were, and Mike Modano a little bit was, but still a cool piece of NHL memorabilia nonetheless. But before we get into today's history breakdown of the career of Sergei Zubov, do want to take a moment and say thank you for stopping by today's episode of Locked on Stars. Whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for making Locked on Stars your first listen of the day. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Locked on Stars podcast wherever you find your podcast at. No matter where you listen or how you listen, the show is always 100% free, and you can also rate and review if you like what you hear. You can also find me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis and the show on Twitter at Locked on Stars. But without any further hesitation, let's get right down to the meat and potatoes of today's episode, which is just kind of highlighting the career of Sergei Zubov, which I know this has kind of been, this past week, and especially in preparation for this episode, has almost been like studying for history class. As, I mentioned, Modano and the jersey behind me kind of being a little bit before my time. And as is kind of the peak of Sergei Zubov's career, I was born in December of 1998. So I was 6 months old when the Dallas Stars won their one and only Stanley Cup in franchise history. I was like a year and a half old or whatever. A year and a half old whenever they made their second appearance in the Stanley Cup in the year 2000. So, a lot of this, the golden age of Dallas Stars hockey, if you will, I was really too young to remember. And even if I was old enough, I grew up in an area that, hockey wasn't the most talked about sport, not the most highlighted sport, not very well covered where I grew up, which now with the internet and technology at the place where it is now, pretty much anyone can access hockey and, discover hockey just about anywhere in the United States. But also we can go back in time and look at articles, look at videos recounting these historical events. I say historical as if, the 1990s were just ancient history. But I know, several of you probably listening are maybe in the same boat as me, where, you didn't get to experience this golden age, if you will, of Stars hockey. Or maybe some of you who are listening, you got to see this. Maybe you went to some of the games back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Maybe you got to go to some of these finals games and watch the Dallas Stars bring the Stanley Cup to Texas for the first time ever. So it's really cool. That's kind of the cool part about the hockey community, is that you have these older generations that remember these things, that get to tell the younger generation like myself about these stories, recounting the tales of Zubov, Modano bringing home the Stanley Cup to Dallas. So really, really cool. But despite Sergei Zubov having his number retired in Dallas at the American Airlines Center tomorrow night, his career did not start in Texas, as I'm sure many of you know. Sergei Zubov was born in Moscow, Russia in 1970, drafted in 1990 by the New York Rangers with the 85th overall pick, the first pick of the 5th round in the 1990 NHL entry-level draft. And he didn't play with the team until 1992 because he was playing in Russia, or at that time, the Soviet Union, for the Red Army's HCCSKA in Russia. until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1992. Sergei Zubov made his NHL debut, where he went on to score 31 points in 49 games as a rookie with the Rangers. And he had his best season with the Rangers in 1993-1994, which is when the New York Rangers won the Stanley Cup for the first time in over 54 years. On that season, Zubov had 12 goals, 77 assists, 89 points in total. I believe that's the highest point total he ever had in his career, his best season, very, very early in his career. And again, was a key player in that championship run for the New York Rangers when they defeated the Vancouver Canucks in 7 games, ending the 54-year championship drought for the Rangers being one of the original 6 teams in the National Hockey League. Really, really cool moment. One of the most iconic moments in NHL history and sports history. Zubov had 19 points in that playoff run and assisted on the first 2 New York Rangers goals in Game 7 to his teammates Brian Leetch and Adam Graves. And of course, it's always so cool. I mentioned that hockey was not the most covered sport out in the West Panhandle of Texas, where I grew up. But I do remember, watching these older Sports Center top 10 moments, like top 10 championship winning moments, or, just seeing these moments on TV or on YouTube. And I always remember seeing this 1994 New York Rangers Stanley Cup run and that final call whenever the Rangers finally won the title when it became permanent. Sam Rosen on the call saying, "The wait is over. The New York Rangers are Stanley Cup champions, and this one will last a lifetime." I could never do justice to the call that Rosen made. I don't even support the New York Rangers. I have no attachment, no loyalty to that franchise, but I get chills watching that clip just because you hear the electricity of the crowd at Madison Square Garden. You hear the call and excitement in Rosen's voice. You see the players celebrating on the ice. And it was so cool that Sergei Zubov got to be a member of that team. And he, along with 4 other of his teammates, got to be the first 4 Russians to have their names engraved on the Stanley Cup trophy. Sergei Zubov, Alexander Karpostev, Sergei Nemchinov, and Alexei Kovalov, the first 4 Russian-born players to have their names put on the Stanley Cup trophy. Such a historic moment for that franchise, the New York Rangers, but also for several members of that team. And despite very solid production in New York, Sergei Zubov was eventually traded to Pittsburgh, where he only spent 1 season, where he recorded 11 goals, 55 assists, 66 points on the year. And due to some disagreement with then Penguins captain Mario Lemieux, he eventually was moved from the team, traded to Dallas on June 22nd, 1996. Lemieux and Zubov both wanted control of the puck in a lot of situations, especially on the power play. Both kind of wanted to be the point guard in that situation. Lemieux, being the captain, was going to get a lot more seniority on that, support from the team, front office, coaching staff, what have you. So Zubov was eventually, removed from the team, traded, like I said, to Dallas, Texas in June 22nd, 1996. And even though he had already been a big part of NHL history and, kind of driven his name into NHL lore, if you will, he seemed to only just be getting started whenever he came to Dallas in 96. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains the #1 spot for all the best sports wagering action for 2022. It's a new year, and there's a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From basketball, football, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager all of your favorite sports. BetOnline.ag, where the game starts. Moving on to the next segment of today's episode of Locked On Stars, your first listen of the day. Going to continue recounting Sergei Zubov's incredible National Hockey League career. Right before the break, we were talking about his career pre-Dallas, the time he spent in New York, his brief 1-season stint with the Pittsburgh Penguins. But then he would come to Dallas, where he would finish out the remainder of his National Hockey League career. And he had some of the best seasons of his career in Dallas. Even playing in a defensive-minded system, the Dallas Stars historically a defensive-minded team, not just something that has become evident in recent seasons under guys like Montgomery and Bonus, but even way back in the day, back in the 90s, the Dallas Stars were a defensive-minded team. But Sergei Zubov still found a way to thrive in this system, becoming a very, very talented offensive defenseman in the National Hockey League. He had 43 points in year one with the Stars, and he was a crucial member of the Dallas Stars 1998 and 1998 to 1999 season, where they went to the Stanley Cup and where they eventually won the Stanley Cup, defeating the Buffalo Sabres in 6 games, winning that crucial Game 6 in Buffalo in triple overtime. 13 points on that playoff run was recorded by Sergei Zubov, being a key contributor to their success throughout that postseason. He also helped Dallas get back to the Stanley Cup Finals in the year 2000, where they unfortunately lost at the hands of the New Jersey Devils in 6 games, 4-2 that series. Still, such an incredible impact on both of those two teams that made cup runs. And even after those 2 seasons, his effect on the team didn't really stop there. His impact on this team was still felt for several years to come. He was never below 40 points until his second to last season, where he recorded 35 in 2007 and 2008. He missed the majority of the 2008 and 2009 season with a hip injury and only played in a handful of games. I think it was below 10 games. He had 71 points in 2005, 2006, his second best season points wise. That was the only season where, surprisingly, the only time he was nominated for any NHL award, any major NHL award. He was nominated for the Norris Trophy that season. 71 points, incredible from a defenseman at that time. It would be an incredible number even today by today's standards. I think he would fit in right there. The only time Sergei Zubov was voted to the All-Star game in the NHL was with the Dallas Stars in 98, 99, and the year 2000, back when the Dallas Stars were making their runs, deep playoff runs, and of course Stanley Cup playoff postseason runs, winning the Stanley Cup in 1999, a key contributor to that team, like I said. And he truly became an icon in the city of Dallas with the likes of guys like Mike Modano, Yuri Lehtinen, and, across the city of Dallas, not just within the Stars organization, but joining the likes of some other really historic favorites across the DFW area, guys like Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, guys that had led the Dallas Cowboys to multiple NFL championships, multiple Super Bowls. Nolan Ryan finished out his MLB career with the Texas Rangers. He had acquired a lot of buzz around the Metroplex area. And so Sergei Zubov inserts his name amongst a lot of those greats who played Dallas sports in the 90s. I guess if you want to throw Dirk Nowitzki in there, Dirk Nowitzki started his career in the late 90s whenever Zubov was winning championships with the Dallas Stars. And, and in the same vein as Dirk, I think Zubov was a really cool case, because I think if you look at the city of Dallas and look at the way that sports are revered here in the city, some of the best players across several different sports are not American-born players. They're foreign players. And so, sports in general have become so globalized in today's world. But I think that was starting, back even in the 80s, 90s, but especially in Dallas with guys like Sergei Zubov, guys like Dirk Nowitzki, Adrian Beltre, not an American-born player, born in Latin America, Luka Doncic, born in Slovenia. So, I mean, really guys from all over the world coming to play in Dallas. And, Sergei Zubov among some of the greats, like the names I just mentioned, even though Luka Doncic is early in his career, already considered one of the all-time greats in the city of Dallas, Texas, by many who are fans of his game. So really, really cool to see Zubov almost kind of be a pioneer of that. So many really, really renowned and revered foreign sports players playing here in America, but really finding a home here in Dallas, in the greater Dallas-Fort Worth area. Such a cool impact that Sergei Zubov had on this team, the Dallas Stars, but also the community here in Texas. And closing out today's episode of Locked on Stars, continuing to talk about the legacy of Sergei Zubov, the way that he paved the way for so many different players in this league. He's one of the most underrated players in NHL history. Just getting to look at his stats and looking at his career, just the way that he played the game. The Dallas Stars have been dropping content all week of guys talking about his impact on the organization and on the game. Guys like Alexander Radulov, Coach Bonus, Jim Nill, just talking about how his passion for the game, his drive for the game, his ability to create looks for himself offensively, but also for his teammates. A really, really good passer, kind of forging, the idea, I guess, if you want to say, of the offensive defenseman, guys like John Klingberg, who play in a lot of similar ways as Sergei Zubov, Ryan Suter, and even a little bit Miro Heiskanen. Miro Heiskanen is certainly a great defender, but also a really, really gifted offensive threat, all probably taking some credit and taking some inspiration from guys like Zubov. And so really, really impactful career, very underrated career for Sergei Zubov, winning the Stanley Cup twice, one of the first Russians to have his name engraved on the Stanley Cup. Really, really cool moment there. He's 12th in all-time NHL scoring by a Russian-born player, second for defenseman born in Russia behind Sergei Gonchar, who played for Pittsburgh and Dallas as well. So that's kind of a unique storyline there. And he paved the way for so many different Russian players who are now some of the best guys in the NHL today. Guys like Alexander Ovechkin, Evgeny Malkin. I made a typo on my list there, and it just says Malky. Malkin for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Nikita Kucherov, Artemi Panarin, Vladimir Tarasenko, and even Alexander Radulov, who I mentioned a second ago, playing for the Dallas Stars. So many Russian-born players who are now dominating the National Hockey League, who are some of the biggest names in the National Hockey League, were there because of guys like Sergei Zubov, who paved the way, being, one of the biggest names as far as Russian-born players in the National Hockey League. He's been overtaken, at least statistically, by a lot of the guys I just named, but a lot of those guys are also forwards. But as far as defensemen, undeniably one of the most underrated defensemen in NHL history. So impactful wherever he played, was really putting up elite numbers up until the end of his career, similar to the way that we see Joe Pavelski doing that now at age 37. And his impact on the game is immeasurable, forging what would become, the offensive defenseman in the NHL. He's credited with being one of those guys who kind of paved the way for the modern National Hockey League defenseman, and he's beloved by Dallas Stars Nation. He's respected across the NHL community, and on Friday night, his legacy will be forever immortalized in the rafters of the American Airlines Center. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked on Stars. Thank you again for making Locked on Stars your first listen of the day. Now go make your second listen of the day, the Locked on Bets podcast, hosted by your boy Q and with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. NFL championship weekend is coming up, conference championship weekend. If you're going to be making bets on those two games, be sure to give the Locked on Bets podcast a listen before you do so. Be sure to also subscribe to and follow the Locked on Stars podcast wherever you get your podcast at, whether that's on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. The show is always 100% free, no matter where you listen or how you listen. And also be sure to rate and review if you like what you hear. Also, give me a follow on Twitter at Dane_Lewis. That's at DANE 2_LEWIS. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Stars. Be sure to give us a follow there as well. Be sure to tune in tomorrow as we'll be previewing the game that'll be happening after Sergei Zubov's jersey retirement, a matchup between the Dallas Stars and the Washington Capitals out of the Metropolitan Division. I'll be joined by Tyler Kuhl of Locked On Washington Capitals to give you a full preview of that game. You're not going to want to miss it. You're going to need all the insight that you can get before this big matchup as the Stars continue to assert themselves in the Western Conference playoff conversation. We'll see you there, Stars fans. Hope you have a great Thursday. We will see you back here tomorrow.